Flesh and Blood, like any competitive trading card game, is a pretty pricey hobby, and while many are fine with this and are more than willing to shell out the cash to have a highly tuned deck, others settle for more budget options, slowly upgrading their decks by picking up cards one by one. But for some people, this isn't enough. They want to play the top tier stuff, but don't want to have to pay the same amount of money that everybody else did. And this leads us to a very contentious issue that has been surfacing online lately. Proxies. Proxy cards come in many forms, from just a slip of paper inside of a sleeve to well-made but obviously fake cards, all the way to full-blown counterfeits. People feel very differently about proxies. Some people feel that they are never acceptable whatsoever under any circumstance, and there are some that feel like everything should be proxy because how dare a trading card cost more than a few cents? I have pretty mixed feelings about proxies, honestly. I feel like there are situations where they are perfectly acceptable and other times where they are downright disrespectful. And I draw the line between these two things by asking one simple question. Is it casual play or is it competitive play? If you're at the kitchen table playing Ultimate Pit Fight or jamming in some blitz games with friends and you've all agreed that you're fine with proxies, then what's the issue? No one's being hurt, you're all on the same page, you've all agreed, there's nothing on the line. I think this is perfectly fine. In fact, I have a whole bunch of these Magic the Gathering proxies that I made for my commander decks. My friends and I were getting tired of how Wizards of the Coast was treating the game and the format. We were getting sick of the price of the cards, and we all just agreed, you know what? Let's just proxy some of them. I mean, two of us had been playing for a decade and had much bigger, more expensive collections than our friend who had only been playing for a year, and proxies allowed us to level that playing field and also sell the real cards for money, which I then spent on Flesh and Blood because it's a superior game. Or maybe you play at your LGS and you want to build a new hero for competitive play, but you want to test the hero out first. You want to test the deck out to make sure you actually like it and are good with piloting it. And you don't really want to spend thousands of dollars building the highly tuned deck just to find out, oh gee, this hero is not for me. So maybe you slap together that Viserai deck and you print out the legendary equipment and maybe a couple of the staple Majestics that you don't want to spend the money on just yet. And before or after an event, you see if there's anybody who wants to sit down so you can play some games and you can test it. And I don't think anybody's really going to have an issue with this. If you're just upfront with them and say, hey, I'm testing this hero, will you be willing to play some games with me? Who's going to have a problem with that? One caveat here. You need to actually be willing to buy these cards at some point. Don't be that guy who's always testing out new decks. I've sat down with commander players that had like 5 or 6 decks and half of the cards in all of them were just slips of paper thrown into a sleeve. Like, don't do that. If you're going to proxy to test cards, actually intend to purchase those cards. Even if it takes you a long time and you're just picking them up one by one, actually make progress. Don't lie to people and say you're just testing something if you don't ever have intention of actually purchasing those cards. But now we get to where it is absolutely unacceptable to use proxies, and that's in competitive play at tournaments with prizes on the line. And let's be honest, if you are entering these events with proxies, they're not even proxies anymore. Because if you're entering an event, your cards have to look like the real thing because you're not allowed to enter with proxies. Therefore, they're really no longer proxies, they're just counterfeits. And counterfeits are, quite frankly, a slap in the face to every other individual who is entering the tournament with you. If every other person in this event has spent money to enter, has spent money on their decks, and is competing for those same real prizes, you insult every single last one of them by sitting down with your fake cards and pretending like you went through the same measures to obtain those cards that everyone else did. If every other player had to spend hundreds of dollars on their cards and you circumvented that and went with cheap fake options, why do you think you should at all be allowed to compete for those same prizes? If you are competing for prizes, you absolutely should have to purchase your cards just like everyone else. And honestly, I think these counterfeits are most insulting to the people who also don't have the legendaries. There are plenty of people who aren't willing to or maybe can't spend the money on top tier decks, and so they play budget options and they accept that their decks are going to be lower power than the rest. Do not sit down across from me with fake cards pretending that they are real and attempt to beat me and win prizes that are actually worth money. Don't be dishonest. And that's the crux of the issue, I think. Dishonesty. Are you playing casually and openly communicating with people that you'll be using proxies? That's perfectly fine. No one's got an issue with that. No one cares. But are you entering competitive events where people are honestly and genuinely competing for prizes and you're doing so with fake cards? Well, quite frankly, there's the door.